In today's video, we're going to be talking about monster waves that were either high or far too dangerous. Kinda like the ones found in this passage that our ancestors on their wooden ships were afraid to pass, or this one that wrecked 500,000 lives. First though, let's talk about one that affected 14 entire countries. 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Morning. Everyone's drinking their coffee, stuffing their faces with breakfast. When suddenly, an earthquake rocked the world with a power that scientists estimate is equivalent to 23,000 Hiroshima-type atomic bombs. This seismic activity caused the planet to vibrate 10 millimeters, effectively changing the Earth's entire rotation and decreasing the time of day. When everyone thought it was over, 20 minutes later, a new and even worse incident happened. The tsunamis that terrorized countries for more than 8 hours. This took place on December 26, 2004, just one day after Christmas. The Sumatra Andaman earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3 occurred due to a rupture along the fault line of the Burma and Indian plate. This event kickstarted a series of tsunami waves that grew to 100 feet high. They devastated communities that settled along the surrounding coast, and some cities turned to rubble and countries suffered crippling damage, with total material losses caused by the tsunamis estimated to have reached $10 million. On top of all that, nearly 230,000 lives were taken in 14 countries, making this catastrophe as one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded. After this disaster, governments and aid groups started prioritizing disaster risk reduction and preparedness. About 168 nations agreed to the Hyogo Framework for Action. This in turn paved the way for global cooperation for disaster risk reduction. Since this agreement, ocean floor earthquake sensors have been installed to give early warnings. Many local communities have also been trained on evacuation and disaster response methods. Thankfully though, no wide-scale devastations have happened since, at least on that level. Kalia II Antarctic Distress. Cruise ships are around to make us feel relaxed. We sail around the world for weeks in what feels like 5-star luxuries. For most, that money's pretty well spent. And where else can we get such an experience? For passengers on this cruise, though, instead of feeling refreshed upon reaching the dock, they were likely relieved. Honestly, though, how couldn't they, after they were stuck in the middle of the ocean in rough weather and crashing cold waves? The Kalia II was making its way back to Argentina when a large wave, described as 30 feet tall, washed over the deck and took out windows and electrical circuitry on the bridge in 55-mile-per-hour winds. This in turn caused electrical malfunctions, making the ship lose power and communications all the same. Videos of this event can be seen online, as the National Geographic Explorer was around to film the mishap. Honestly, it's a good thing they were, because the Nat Geo crew stopped to monitor the situation once they realized the cruise was in distress. Quickly, they set to work and were able to rig a line to send a satellite phone over to the crew of the crippled ship. After a little bit, the Kalia's engines began working, though on reduced power, and started to head for home while accompanied by a naval vessel. They reached the port of Ushuaia early on Friday, 3 days since the incident. Throughout this experience, the company behind the Kalia II stated that no passenger was harmed and that the only wounded man, a crewmate, only sustained minor injuries. The Drake Passage. Since we just finished talking about the Kalia II distress, I'd like to focus a little more on the area of water the incident took place in. The Drake Passage is considered a milestone for every traveler. The experience gives a true sense of adventure because of how unpredictable the waves and weather conditions can be, regardless of the time of year. It's so notorious that some travelers have even written guides online for those who have yet to brave the waters. Let's begin with a bit of history. This body of water was named after Sir Francis Drake, a famous English explorer who discovered the passage in 1578, proving the existence of an open water route south of South America. Even then, though, it was known for its turbulent seas, which made it very dangerous to cross on their wooden ships. Now it is a little better because of modern construction and technology. This 620-mile wide passage is situated where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans meet, hence the convergence of waves, winds, and current. It's also very deep, with an average depth of 11,150 feet, making the area diverse enough to host plenty of fauna. Now on to the meat and potatoes of this entry right here. How big or terrible are the waves of the Drake Passage? Well, according to online sources, the waves peak over at 40 feet. Might not sound that terrible, but out on the sea, most of you'd be likely to be praying for your lives. No wonder this place is so notorious. Anthem of the Seas vs. Storm. Sadly, it seems big waves are just a thing that happen to most cruise ships. The Royal Caribbean's 168,666-ton Anthem of the Sea's passengers endured a choppy and nausea-inducing ride in 2016 when their Bermuda-bound cruise liner steered straight into post-tropical Cyclone Hermione. This wouldn't be the first time for the liner, though, as the same 16-deck ship was the same ship that suffered damage months prior. This was after sailing into the hurricane-force winds and 30-foot waves off the coast of North Carolina. In the newer situation, though, passengers got more than they bargained for, as the ship was caught only shortly after departing from Bayonne, New Jersey. They said passengers took their complaints to social media. They then updated everybody about getting caught in the whipping winds and angry waves, which caused massive seasickness from the constant swaying, as well as the dangerous flying dishes in the ship's restaurants. Jeez, not only are you fighting to keep your dinner inside of you also gotta fight it from the outside as well. Amar Torres, a spokesman for the Royal Caribbean, told the public that the Anthem's crew changed their course days before departure to avoid Cyclone Hermione. Unfortunately, Hermione was spinning up the Atlantic coast, making the team opt to take an entirely different route, which later proved to be the worst move ever, as the ship wound up in the worst possible position, right up in front of the storm where winds and waves are strongest. Thankfully, though, everybody landed safely in the end. Storm Gloria. At least 8 people died in Spain thanks to Storm Gloria, which rampaged across the country's eastern side, unleashing winds of up to 90 miles per hour and waves up to 44 feet high. Not only is there a death toll, but a missing people count as well. At this time, at least 3 people remained missing for 4 days after the storm barreled and tore through the region with torrential rain and heavy snowfall. After the storm began calming down days later, people began to realize the damage that the weather had caused them. Over 200,000 people were left without power, rice paddies along the Ebro River Delta were destroyed, and weather alerts were triggered across 3 dozen provinces. According to Dani Palacios, head of beach services for Barcelona, this helped give Storm Gloria the infamy of being the worst sea story of the century. It's a statement that's easy to believe. Just look at the videos and news regarding the incident online, for Pete's sake. Some victims were actually found in an Alicante river, while others were found in collapsed buildings that fell due to the heavy rainfall. A man working in a greenhouse was also said to have been killed as hail pounded on the structure in one province, while in another, a homeless person was frozen to death. The most tragic thing about it all, though, is that nobody saw it coming. People only reported that they would suddenly see the 44.5-foot waves crash into the seafront ships and flood the nearby municipalities. May Spain rebuild. Hurricane Irma. On September 6, 2017, Hurricane Irma, the strongest Atlantic Basin hurricane ever recorded outside of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, devastated a string of small Caribbean islands. The eye of the storm passed over Barbuda, damaging 95% of the structures on the island. After that, the cyclone moved to southwest Florida, battering the state's southern half and leaving a trail of tornadoes and floods. Because of that, a major evacuation was ordered, forcing 5.6 million people out of their homes. Other places it wreaked havoc on were Georgia and South Carolina, leaving millions of people without power. This storm, which stretched 650 miles from east to west, affected at least 9 U.S. states, making roads into rivers, uprooting trees, ripping down power lines, and effectively cutting off numerous coastal communities. I know some of you are wondering, what do waves have to do with this one? Well, from the sounds of it, most of the damage was done because of the downpours and windfall, and you'd be right on your assumption. However, the waves aggravated the situation. Take what happened in the north of Puerto Rico. While much of the main island experienced tropical storm-force winds with a peak gust of 111 miles per hour and rainfall that caused 7 rivers to flood, the communities along the coast had to battle with waves observed to be up to 1.5 feet in height. May not sound much, but being forced out of safety because of higher water during a ravaging storm? Probably not good for anybody, really. Ocean Breeze Freighter. Nearly a decade ago, bulk carrier MV Ocean Breeze was being battered by huge waves on a Chilean beach about 1.5 miles south of the port of San Antonio after one or both anchors broke free. Sadly, unlike other ships on this list, the Ocean Breeze wasn't able to recover. Only 10 months later, Titan Salvage and TNT Salvage were able to remove the wreck. According to the crew on board, it was no easy task, as unique special equipment, ingenuity, and teamwork were necessary to achieve success. So, was there anything different about this liner that made it unsalvageable, or were the waves simply that intense? This Hong Kong-flagged bulk carrier had a cargo of wheat and soybeans weighing 34,000 tons. Images proving this were sent by Captain Eric Amar Rodriguez Aracena. According to him, when the ship ran around on Lolios Beach near the port of San Antonio, Chile, the anchor started to drag and broke away, causing the ship to ride the wind and waves toward the shore. Since then, it had been stuck in place and unable to recover. It actually took a fleet of Chilean Navy helicopters to rescue the crew of 24. While there is no metric for how tall the waves that crashed against the ship were, based on visuals alone, we can tell the water whipping the carrier's side was several feet high. Its impact must also be strong to leave the crew and company no choice but to sink the wreck to clear the way. Storm Ophelia. Hurricane Ophelia, also known as Storm Ophelia, was one of the worst storms to affect Ireland in the last half-century. It's also recorded as the easternmost Atlantic major hurricane. Ophelia began with non-tropical origins at a decaying cold front. Unfortunately, it was located within a favorable environment, causing Ophelia to steadily strengthen until, eventually, it grew to become a major force while at the south of the Azores. There it brushed against the archipelago and left high winds and heavy rainfall. Later, it reached Ireland, where most of its devastation struck. 2 days before landfall, Ireland's National Meteorological Service issued a status red warning, an unprecedented move as such actions were generally taken within a day before the event. All schools and other public services, such as court and district court, were closed for 2 days. The transportation industry was also affected. Airports canceled at least 50% of their booked flights, and all public transport was canceled, especially ferries. Why though? Well, according to the buoy data, the waves caused by Storm Ophelia would reach peaks of 58 feet. That's above half the height of the tsunami that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives years ago. After preparing and experiencing the worst, including gusts of up to 119 miles per hour, the ESB group confirmed more than 360,000 people lost power in the wake of the storm. Several people also died due to hazards caused by the strong winds, with one man getting crushed under a fallen tree. Later, insurance companies claimed the storm caused massive damage, costing up to $81.1 million. Stella Solaris cruise ship. Could you just imagine a cruise ship, said to be prepared for anything, being battered by the waves to the point that the sea almost engulfed it? Well, one day, the cruise ship Stella Solaris struggled, and not just any struggle. It honestly looked as though it was ready to capsize multiple times after rolling waves of tsunamis hits it. But the restaurant floor wasn't looking great after. Before we continue, we do have to clarify something. Tsunamis out in the open ocean are not like tsunamis on the coast. Since we have a few warning signs that will readily appear, people would already know when something big is about to happen at the shores. The most obvious would be the water quickly receding to expose the ocean floor, something people call a drawback. Out on the ocean, though, no such signs would be spotted by the naked eye. At most, people may see waves about 3 feet tall as most of the tsunami is underwater. Consequently, ships may get stuck due to this lack of detection. This is what happened to the Stella Solaris. Because equipment is necessary to detect an incoming tsunami out in deep water, the crew sailed ahead and found themselves stuck in the middle of one. This caused the ship to tumble around, barely able to keep itself from capsizing. Given how tsunamis aren't a one-time, big-time affair though, it took a while before the ship could somewhat recover, especially since the waves shorted out the engine controls. Now, the waves may not have been too destructive here, but the people inside would surely have felt highly panicked. 100-foot wave, North Sea. In a previous video, we established that oil field workers have one of the most dangerous jobs. But do you know that those assigned in the North Sea have one more thing to contend with? Big 100-foot waves. See, there's this thing called rogue waves out in the open. These waves are highly unpredictable and are at least twice the size of waves that accompany them. Part of their unpredictability is because these things come from any direction, regardless of where the wind comes from. Sadly, there's barely any analysis of it to help people avoid coming across one. Scientists used to think that it was a sailorman's hoax since there was no data of that ever happening before, but that belief changed on New Year's Eve 1995. That year, hurricane-strong winds were blowing in the North Sea, and 40-foot waves crashed on the Draupner oil rig. Workers weren't worried, as the rig was designed to withstand strong gusts. At about 3 p.m. that day, though, the order was given that all personnel enter the rig's structure. 20 minutes later, engineers were stunned. The rig's detectors logged a wave almost 66 feet high. Legend said things like that only occurred once every 10,000 years, but the sensor wasn't malfunctioning. The wave was real. These days, oil rigs don't only contend with 66-foot waves. Rigs and sometimes ships have to deal with 100-foot ones, and just look at these videos. Personally, I don't think I'd be laughing that heartily. Now it's time for the day's best pick. Can you guess what height this surfer conquered to earn a spot on the Guinness Book of World Records? Biggest wave ever surfed. As someone who knows nothing about surfing, I assume the biggest waves would be those that happen in the tropics. If not in there, then somewhere on the shores of Hawaii or maybe even Australia. Though, after doing some research for this entry, I realized that we were all wrong. Over the last decade, a wave known as Nazare, located off the beach of Praia de Norte on Portugal's rugged west coast, has been drawing the attention of the best big wave surfers. The Nazare is a big beast, and the wave is likely to break the magical 100-foot barrier that has apparently always been the holy grail of big wave surfing. The Nazare exists thanks to the Canjo de Nazare, the largest underwater canyon in Europe. This canyon reaches depths of 16,500 feet, tapering off to a point as it meets land, which makes it possible to funnel the swells that have been building and traveling through the ocean upwards into gigantic water towers. It's these very towers that surfers seek and brave, hoping that one day they may break the world record themselves. And someone did 2 years ago. German surfer Sebastian Studner won the world record for surfing the biggest wave, an 86-foot tower that made Studner seem like an ant. Took him 2 years to get the title from the previous holder, who surfed a wave under 80 feet. Geez, good for him though that he managed to do it. But I imagine things could have gotten ugly had he gotten wiped out at that point. Japan Earthquake Tsunami. On March 11, 2011, a great tragedy occurred, known simply as the Great Tohoku Earthquake. This disaster claimed thousands of lives and severely crippled the country's infrastructure. It began with a magnitude 9 earthquake, shaking the country's northeastern region, unleashing a savage tsunami due to underwater tectonic activity. The Tohoku tsunami produced waves up to 132 feet high with speeds of 500 miles per hour. According to the Japanese government, this caused 450,000 people to lose their homes, 19,747 people to pass away, and up to 199 billion in damages. According to the World Bank, however, the total economic cost of this tragedy could reach up to 235 billion. This makes it the costliest disaster in world history. To this very day, about 39,000 evacuees are still trying to regain all that they've lost, with 1,000 still living in temporary housing. And this is to speak of those who survived. Currently, over a decade later, 2,500 people are still missing. Aside from that, in addition to destroyed homes, businesses, and public roads, the tsunami caused the meltdown of 3 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, as the tsunami overwhelmed the power plant's electrical power and backup generators, making the plant lose all its cooling capabilities. This worsened things as the reactor released toxic radioactive materials into its surroundings, causing further evacuation. To end this entry, here's a quote from Vasily Titov, director of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Center for Tsunami Research. The tsunami itself died out a long time ago, but the effects in Japan will be there for decades. New Zealand HMNZS Otago. How'd you feel that the vessel you're on had to deal with waves this big? Probably not great, right? Likely shaking in your boots while silently praying to whichever religious deity is awake at the time. Still, this is what the military sometimes has to deal with, and in this case, it's the New Zealand Navy. Terrifying videos have surfaced online about how 66-foot-high waves, sometimes higher in some areas, crashed against the Royal New Zealand's Navy HMNZS Otago while traveling in the Southern Ocean. If the waves weren't bad enough, the weather wasn't cooperative either. Rain poured down everywhere while the ship's deck was getting whipped and cleaned by the massive torrents. At some point you can see the gun barrel violently jerking up from the sheer force of water alone. The HMNZS Otago was a Protector-class offshore patrol vessel, 279 feet long with a baseline speed of 25 miles an hour. Knowing these metrics, it's pretty easy to estimate just how monstrous the ocean was at the time. Things might not have gone down well if it had happened to other ships, though. So what were they doing there anyway? Well, the Navy was on a patrol mission in the Southern Ocean, as most of its exports travel through trade routes in that vicinity. It's unfortunate, however, that they got caught there. Storms are known to be brutal near the Antarctic. At the end of the day, at least they did return home safe. The things the military does to keep everyone okay, am I right? Chemical tanker versus waves. You know that thing I said earlier that if other ships experience what the HMNZS Otago did, that something tragic may have happened? I take that back. On April 29th last year, a tanker was caught in extremely turbulent weather. One of the crew members recorded a video of the frightening scenes in front of him. The ship was crossing the North Atlantic when it was struck by a series of enormous waves in a moment you could only imagine would have happened in movies. The massive tanker bobbed up and down amidst the angry waters as ferocious waves and gusty winds pounded the ship. According to AccuWeather senior meteorologist Tyler Royce, the force of the wind surpassed hurricane levels, making it very effective at kicking up large swells. The waves in turn were said to be more than 50 feet across the ocean, stretching from eastern Canada to western Europe. That said, those waves are no stranger to the North Atlantic. Larger waves have been recorded throughout the years. In 2013, a wave that measured up to 62 feet high was reported by a buoy between Iceland and the UK, holding the record for the largest significant wave height measured by a buoy in the North Atlantic. In 2014, however, a 76-foot high wave was recorded by another buoy, and more has happened since, though the most recent occurrence had a 58-foot wave crash offshore from British Columbia, Canada. I already wasn't going to travel by water anytime soon, and this just reinforces it. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, and you will get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it, it really works. USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier struggles. Supercarriers are huge military ships, acting as a seagoing airbase equipped with full-length flight decks and facilities for carrying, arming, deploying, and recovering aircraft. This aircraft carrier, the USS Kitty Hawk, was 1,068.9 feet long and 282 feet wide and traveled at 38 miles per hour. Massive and impressive, am I right? It's really no wonder that it was called the Queen of the Sea, as it's the product of modern technology and showcases the advancements humankind has made. Though it still had trouble with waves. Not to say it would have capsized, though. I mean, more of an annoyance than anything else. Still, to think a wave could inconvenience even the largest of ships is a baffling thought. Just shows that even the most impressive ships can still face incredible danger from Mother Nature. In a video taken by an officer at the time, enormous waves pounded water on deck, causing water to spew anywhere. Doesn't sound too serious, right? But think of what would happen had the wave crashed on the side of the deck. That fighting jet might have ended up rolling across the deck, and that isn't to downgrade the secure chains holding it down or the craftsmanship of whoever makes the military vessels. But still, Murphy's Law is still a thing. What's scary to me, though, is that this flight deck is already about 60 feet above the water. That means the waves the storm brought were massive, considering it covered the front part of the ship. Really makes you wonder what would happen if it got hit full force. See you all next time!